Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome again to another Talk Architecture podcast with your host, Naziaty Muhammad Yaacob. Today, I'm going to discuss a topic that is related to my consulting company, and we provide services in what I will describe here the system thinking in architecture and disability. This is appropriate discussion with regard to the aging population, the independent living movement, the need to have implementation of laws regarding to practices that needs to be not discriminating for disabled persons and to be able to, do the work for the future of ourselves. So basically, I'll be talking about the architecture system, and then I'll be talking about the disability as a system. And we will approach in understanding what does it mean by systematically thinking about all these things. I mean, if we don't think in terms of system, what are we thinking of? In terms of piecemeal solutions and design with this regard to the context, with this regard to what happens to other things associated with what we're trying to solve. It is true that sometimes we just need to get on with it and resolve the thing as and when is needed. But in budgeting and planning, and it helps the government or the implementation agency to foresee what is needed to be done with regard to the issues that I mentioned earlier. So system thinking, I would like to use in a way that I know that it was defined as a factory-like processes, but I'm looking at it as more of things relating to each other, and that a system is created from just the fact that they are needing each other, those different factors. Now, when we join architecture and disability together, we will find niche areas in which we ought to resolve the issues of barriers and challenges for persons with disabilities and older persons and families with young children in the built environment in which it is, it is not accessible or safe or hazardous or not usable for them to function in the normal everyday thing of work, eating, living, traveling, doing recreational activities together. So we'd want people to enjoy being together and having the ability or having the choices really to do those things that I mentioned earlier. So when I think about system thinking is what is system thinking that I mentioned just now. So we start by, answering this question by analyzing whatever there is at hand with regard to an environment or an area, a neighborhood or a building complex, or just a simple building or a shop. I mean, we just need to analyze, and whatever that we get, if it's a city, if it's a town, if it's a bigger area that is like a district that encompass several neighborhoods, then we're looking at, is there a survey being done earlier? Often there are no surveys done. So we're based on literature review, on maybe reports on in the newspaper, or other form of documentation that we could use to find out the issues concerning that area. And of course, we can base on observation techniques, either direct observation or participant observation, which I quickly would like to add. Direct observation is to do with based on standards, perhaps the Malaysian standards 1184 here, 2014, regarding accessibility for disabled persons. You could use that document and the content to create a checklist and do an access audit to get the data. So that is the intention of doing the access audit, to get the data that you can produce as direct observation technique. So the participant observation is we can record reports or feedback from participants, and it'll be great if those participants are disabled persons themselves or people or users of that environment. Apart from disabled person, I mentioned elderly persons and families with young children and mothers who are expectant or nurturing kids or babies. So these are, what define the results or the information would define what is happening, and it could be many issues coming up, different issues, design or services. Usually, when we talk about the issues relating to barriers in the built environment, then we look at this in terms of architecture and disability. So in architecture, we understand it is to do with a system as well. What are the systems? So this could be a lot of things there. But I want to mention just now that architecture is application. This is a very, shall we say, a general way of describing architecture, and it can also be applied in digital architecture, like application, technology, or specifically the built environment. So even in the built environment, we have the issues of application and technology. So architecture is, first there's two circles or two subsets, or two sets, sorry. And then you get the intersection of the two circles. One is practice and one is education. How do I get those two circles or two sets? Is because to be able to build, you need certified architects, licensed architects, and construction professionals involved with the building of things, the development processes like submission of drawings and supervision and monitoring of the work. And they have their own system with regard to construction, obviously. So we'd always as an activist earlier, we'd always ask, do they actually check on accessibility while they are drawing or submit the building plans, or while they are building? Do they check for accessibility? So in that system, which is the main system, they don't normally do that unless it is required, obviously, by the local authority or the reactive agents. I call them the reactive, and the professionals and the architects and the client as proactive. So the reactive processes will be checking and making sure that it's accessible. So all in all, you're thinking about legislation and the needs. Now, without legislation, does the professionals actually understand the needs of the users in general, and in particular, disabled persons and older persons. As that in a legislation, like in the Uniform Building Bylaw 34A and similar, under the Streets Drainage and Building Act, is that, in Malaysia you have that, and is that legislation being enforced, yeah, by the local authority, because the reactive processes need to be working in the system in order for in practice that that particular legislation is being used. It was there because of a need. So apart from legislation, you have the professionals actually knowing what to do or being educated already and implementing what they know and the skills they have in practice. So hence you have the other set, which is education. And education is actually very niche here, where you have a lot of architecture education. You have so many other things that you need to be educated with. And for example, or educated with. Let's look at the preposition. So please excuse me. So educated on a lot of areas, such as construction, environmental science, history and theory, shall we say, structures. So they do design. So architecture graduates, and after that, the CPD, continuous professional development, have they been educated in understanding the needs? Have they been educated on universal design and standards? So it's a niche area of education within the whole architecture education system of education. We just have to acknowledge that it is a niche area. And it's good if we could provide continuous professional development, shall we say, learning for those who need to know and need to implement it. So the understanding of legislation is necessary in the education part. We have another set, which is disability as a system. Now, disability as a system is so much. There's so much to it. That has to do with the healthcare system, welfare system. So the built environment or the infrastructure or design for disability is a niche area as well, and is under the rights of persons with disabilities. So in places such as in Malaysia, we don't have rights for persons with disabilities. In the federal constitution, there is no, shall we say, a mention of disabled persons in it. They're trying to do that, number one, or they're trying to put the word disability. So number two is in the Person with Disability Act, it's not an anti-discrimination act or have a penalty if you do not, shall we say, provide accessibility in that act. It's still being reviewed. So then we have the most that we can do in Malaysia is referring to the Uniform Building Bylaw 34A under the Streets Drainage Building Act, which has mandatory in all states in Malaysia except Sabah, a code of practice to be followed by construction, those in construction, those in property development, spaces that are public in general, that common property areas in housing, streets environment. Streets environment are the jurisdiction of local authorities. So that there is this gaps where under the Street Drainage and Building Act, we have the specific code of practice, but under the Highway Act or the Town and Country Planning Acts, Road Safety Act, it doesn't really mention anything on rights of person with disabilities or a penalty who are under those acts. It's the governing or the implementation and agency like Public Works Department and the local authorities. So how do you compel the local authority engineers and architects and professionals to follow the Streets and Drainage Building Act? Although it's not, is it for them? It's more of their responsibility themselves to do these things and to get it right. So there are a bit of gray areas and not really straightforward penalties on them. So when I talk about disability as a system, who is actually taking care of disabled persons' issues? Who is actually taking care of older persons' issues? It is not really clear in terms of under disability. So you can't have the welfare department or the Department of Disabled Persons Development in Malaysia is JPOKU. You can't have them being the implementation agency. They're more of administration, more of the welfare system. So the rights and the needs of disabled person is a niche area that sits between architecture practice and education. It sits in the sets or the subsets of architecture, which is practice, one set, and education, another set. So you can imagine that disability, you can have like this central niche area where the rights and the needs of disabled person is being considered to be addressed in this. So when we're addressing about the niche area, who's taking care of this? Who's going? Is this that is apparently a gap in terms of problem solving this issue of inaccessibility, lack of standards of enforcement, or the many things that we have identified that is problematic or is just full of challenges and barriers that comes from the system itself. You know, in when we think about system thinking, like architecture practice, there could be system parts of the system that is very well run or is in good condition, and there could be some which is like this thing on accessibility, which is clearly lacking because we can see from our observations and our literature review and our surveys that it's not working. So hence, to solve this gap in knowledge, me as the founder of Zasve So Design, now we are creating one which is under a company called Zyron Engineering Services, Accessibility Solutions, where we are going to launch an online course that have three parts to it that is to do with learning about the standards and what is standards and accessibility. And then the second part is the ability to do access audit on existing buildings. Because in Malaysia, for example, we have buildings before 1990s that are not accessible. Even after 1990s, some buildings, I don't know how they got, shall we say, away with it, is not accessible. There are steps going to the car parking, for example. And then we have, you need to have this understanding and also skills to do access audit for the purpose of research and collecting data and for the purpose of renovating a building. So then the third one is learning how to design based on universal design principles and beyond. There are other concepts or principles that could assist in making you a better designer when it comes to designing for the needs of disabled persons and older population. So there you go. You have the importance of the system thinking and approaching understanding about the architecture system and the disability systems, and how we are identify the gaps in the different sets of systems, this system sets, rather than just reacting case by case basis. We need to understand the system. So anyone taking the course would be much more critical, be much more aware, and have the ability in terms of knowledge and skills to implement, to apply, and to use the technology to create a more accessible built environment for everyone. So that's it, really. Thank you very much for listening.